Thank you very much. And Chris, if you'd like to take a seat for 10 minutes, you're welcome to. If you want to keep standing, please do. Because what we want to do is just take you through the financial results, the financial performance of this business for a few minutes, and then dig into the how and the why, and that's the bit that I need you up here for. So join with me, please. Have a look at these 4 boards here, but also the material that's in your handout from page 20 through to page 25. And so what we want to look at is how does Driffield's financial performance compare over time, and how does it compare to the dairy base average, which gives us a good benchmark to make some interesting comparisons across. If we just start by having a look in your handout on page 20, there's some general notes on the performance of the farm, and also a table at the bottom. The table at the bottom takes you through farm working expenses on the left hand side, and then operating expenses, operating profit on the right hand side. I'm not going to dwell too much on those, but just want to point out a few things there so that you start to get a feel of how this business operates. If we look at the 24-25 season, we see cash income of just under $10.70, quite a reasonable amount of livestock income contributing to that. And then farm working expenses, the major things contributing to farm working expenses, staff and labour costs, stock expenses, supplementary feed, other working expenses, and then general admin and overhead. So that brings the farm working expenses for this business in the 24-25 season to just under $6, $5.93. That's farm working expenses. When we start talking about operating expenses and getting to operating profit, we have to add in a few other things. There's no livestock valuation change in these accounts, but what has been added is 15 cents or $170,000 of a support block adjustment. As you've heard, this farm has its own support land. If all of that feed and grazing that occurs on that support land was external to the milking platform, to the business, then there'd be probably another 15 cents of costs incurred. So that's added in, and depreciation also added in. So then when we start looking at operating expenses, bottom of the page, you see they're sitting at $6.44 per kilogram milk solids. That becomes important as we look at some of the other data as we get into it, and operating profit of $4.24. So I just wanted to start with that real quick overview of the detail of the business, and then we're going to dig into it much more. So with that as background, I want to draw your attention to these 2 graphs here. We've got lots of graphs in the handout as well, and a few of them up here, and lots of detail on the graph. It's important that you get your head around the different colours and lines and all the other things, because there's lots going on here. But just starting with this first one here, the solid lines here are the Driffield performance across multiple years, and then the hashed lines beside them are the dairy base average. So just looking right here, for example, total gross income for Driffield is the solid bar here. Total gross income for dairy base average is the hashed line beside it. So take note of that as we go through and look at this material. What we've got in this graph here is milk solids, income and expenses expressed per kilogram milk solids. The next one is per hectare. So just looking at a per kilo milk solids basis, we see on this farm compared to the dairy base average that income is similar per kilo milk solids. Expenses are generally a bit lower per kilogram milk solids, which means that profitability per kilo milk solids is generally higher on this farm on a per kilo milk solids basis. What changes is because of the exceptional pasture performance on this farm that we're going to dig into in the next session. When we start looking on a per hectare basis, we see a bigger differentiation going on, and that's the value of the second set of data here. So again, solid lines Driffield, hashed lines dairy base average, 24-25 data, 23-24 data, 22-23 data. And look across that, and what do you see going on? We see income per hectare considerably higher from that extra pasture production, extra milk production, contributing to extra milk income. Operating expenses, similar, a little bit higher for Driffield on a per hectare basis, but that flows through to significant profit per hectare driven out of this business. So important when you're looking at data across farms, What are we looking at? What is the metric that matters? Make sure we understand the business, because we may look at one metric, might look at a set of data here, and not look at it in context of the wider business to understand the real impact that it's having. We can put those two sets of data together through DairyBase and come up with a really nice graph like this, which shows operating expenses per kilogram milk solids across the bottom here, operating profit per hectare going up the side up here. It tells us a lot of things. There's a lot of information in there, and there's a pretty big range across all of those dots. Incidentally, the different colours represent the different amount of imported feed coming into the business. And you see some general trends going on. You certainly see a downward trend across all of the data set. You see that to a similar degree across the different amounts of imported feed coming into those businesses. What I see standing out to me is if you've got low operating expenses, you can still have low or higher operating profit per hectare depending where you are. But what I also see is if you've got high operating profit, it's just about impossible to do it with high operating expenses. So really important to keep our eye on those operating expenses and operating profit per hectare. We don't want to be out here. We do want to be up here. The best way of being up here is making sure we're also in this vicinity here. Okay? I would like to hear your questions and comments as we go through too, so please do that. Just moving on then through. The final board that we've got up here, but we've got a lot more information in your handout that I'm keen that you keep looking at, is right over this side here, where we've pulled out the operating expenses into various categories for Driffield over time, and we've been fortunate to have access to 4 years of data, so you've got a lot of information going on there. Apologies for you guys over to this side, the left-hand side, but this is also in your handout as well, bottom of page 23. What you've got going on here is operating expenses again across multiple years. Driffield, because this is all Driffield data, Driffield is the solid, 24-25 is the solid line, through to the more transparent line on the right hand side, 21-22. And so what you're seeing is what contributes operating expenses over time, what's changing over time on this business, grouped by significant categories from supplementary and imported feed, including calf milk, grazing, etc., right down through to freight and other admin. And on the right hand side we pulled out both all the administration costs and depreciation costs as two groups that are a little bit different, have different impact than these other variables around electricity and so forth. But it's important to keep an eye on that graph as we talk through the next few pages of your handout as well, because that shows the relativity of some of these expense items over time, as well as how they differ compared to some of the other items. Because I've got some graphs that make some of these items look quite significant, but actually keep in mind where they are relative to some of these other costs. For example, been an interesting conversation and an important conversation recently about the impact of fuel prices in our businesses. It hurts paying nearly $4 this past weekend for diesel compared to around $2 not that long ago. But have a look at where fuel sits with vehicle costs right down here. And even if fuel costs double, think about what that is in relation to, for example, R&M. Doubling fuel costs is still probably likely less than what R&M costs are in our businesses. So it's important to focus on the right things and put our energy into things that really matter, because while that's important, what's going on this side of the page is still going to have a much more significant impact in our business. Just turn with me then to the next couple of pages in your handout, please. What we've done on pages 24 and 25 is give you the breakdown of some of those cost components of operating expenses at Driffield and also in DairyBase. These are not on the boards, so have a look at your handout, but please keep in mind the relativity of these costs relative to that board on the far side there as well as we look at them. Again, lots of information in these handouts, in these graphs. The solid bars are always Driffield, the hashed lines are always the dairy base average. So I'm looking at the graph on the top of page 24, for example, where it's comparing supplementary and grazing costs at the bottom, the darker green, labour costs, fertiliser, regrassing. And what you see is you look at those across between Driffield and dairy base across multiple years, you start to see where does Driffield differ to dairy base, where is Driffield getting an advantage over the rest of our dairy base information, and where is the dairy base showing there's a potential opportunity or a difference in management or perhaps in coding and how the business operates that separates a difference or creates a difference between how Driffield achieves its overall outcome and what's in dairy base. And so just for example, looking at that top one, we see that supplementary feed is lower than the dairy base average, but the labour costs are higher. And there's some reasons already been talked about that, and we're going to come back to that as well. But those are the things I'm keen to encourage you to look into and see how they compare and how your farm compares. And that means where is there opportunity to understand what is driving that, what is the opportunity that that farm may have achieved, and is a potential opportunity for yourself. Then look down at the next graph, bottom of page 24, where we're looking at things like repairs and maintenance, animal health, electricity, vehicles and fuel, all those costs over time. Again, Driffield, the solid lines, dairy base data and hashed lines. And what stands out here is while R&M is broadly similar, and that's probably helped on this farm by the comment that you made in terms of GWA's involvement, but so R&M similar on the scale and operation of this business, but animal health is higher. So what are they doing here that is creating higher animal health costs, and how is that contributing to perhaps the overall performance of the business? Is that an opportunity? Invest a little bit more in animal health, get a lot more in farm performance. Question for you to ponder and to ask of Chris. But then there's other things that clearly this farm is doing a lot better in terms of overall cost management. And that includes freight and other expenses. That's all the other things that don't fit neatly in any of the other things. Significantly lower here than across the dairy base average. Small in total sense, and that's what's also important to keep in mind. Don't chase saving 5 cents if you leave $5 on the table. But keep in mind, every 5 cents adds up to that $5 mark. And then if you just flip over to look at the last two graphs on the financial section, page 25, where we've also got administration and depreciation. And these are worth looking at as well, because unlike some of the other costs we've just looked at, it does amount to a reasonable amount of cost, and it's largely a cost that we have not as much opportunity to influence as we would like. They're choices that often others make for us. I don't think many of you get to set your rates bill, but you have to pay it. So how significant are those things, and then how can we make sure that we get the most out of that, or that we dilute that by as much profitable milk as possible. So looking at administration and depreciation on this farm, depreciation's a little higher on this business, no surprise there really, but administration costs are broadly similar. So that's the wrap of the breakdown of costs in a very short period of time, but to give you a bit of an idea of what's going on in the financial performance of this business, and hopefully some good data for you to look at and go back and think through and discuss more later. Final piece always is income. And so just because of the order of graphs and other bits and pieces, it's the final graph, and perhaps rightly so, in the financial section. What I want to draw your attention to, again looking at dairy base versus Driffield, you see generally income is pretty similar in total across these farms. We expect that. We largely all supply milk to a similar group of processors. We generally receive a similar milk income. What can change is stock income. And generally Driffield, because of choices around farm performance, choices around animal health, breeding and stock management, is achieving more income in terms of livestock than the dairy base average. And then this farm has also had used some milk futures and things in the past, and so we put those expenses and income into other income as well. And there's certainly a point in time a couple of years back where that was a significant contribution to income for this business. So that wraps up the income and expenses side of the business, looking into the detail. That is the over kind of arching big picture conversation. What's really important is not so much the numbers there, but the how, the why. What is going on that is contributing to those things? I've talked about a couple of those things. One is clearly the pasture performance that leads to more income, that leads to higher profitability. But that alone, I don't think is enough to drive the level of profitability that's coming out on this farm. I think there's a lot more to it. And Chris, this is where I'd like you, Chris, if you could come back on stage, because this is where I'd like to get your input in. I've talked through some of the performance that you've achieved here, but the how and the why is the really important piece. So I'd like to get your input into that, to dig into what's really going on driving performance here. And shortly we'd be keen to hear your questions and comments from the floor as well. But Chris, as I look through all your data, and I really appreciate you being open and sharing it with us, there's about $6 million a year spent to run this business. That's $500,000 a month. That is not small change. There's a lot going on to do that. How do you make sure that you've got the financial discipline, that you've got good practices in place? Because I think that's about the volume of things bought as well as the price paid for things. How do you manage the financial processes on this farm to achieve the level of performance you are?
Is that on? It doesn't actually feel too difficult. The number is a big number, but I guess our budgeting, we go so far in depth and we code everything that when you split everything out and you get your animal health into, say, 12 different items and that, and then it's split across 2 farms and that, it actually becomes smaller and more manageable, and you can actually just work, and then you've set everything across to, say, only 1 or 2% of total spending, and then you've timed it out throughout the year. So you're not dealing with massive numbers on a daily basis. You're just looking at a small cross-section and focusing on that at one point at a time.
That sounds like attention to detail.
OCD, I think.
In a very good way. Building on that, what delegation do you give to staff in regard to buying decisions to maintain cost control? You've said you can break it down to lots of little items. How much do you delegate when they can buy versus not buy?
Generally, R&M is just ad lib, whatever's required on the day to keep going. But in terms of everything else, if I haven't done my job properly, we won't have stuff on farm. But my role is to plan ahead, have everything that's required on farm when it's required.
I'll come back to the planning ahead in just a moment. But just to pick up on another part related to that, you talked about going away, you talked about staff, farm manager being away for a month, you being away for a couple of weeks. How do you maintain that discipline when you're on leave to make sure the business is still maintaining that strong financial management?
We plan quite far ahead, so all minerals, everything there. We've got a few sheds further down where we'll stockpile, so we'll buy a lot of stuff in May, June, July, so everything's on farm. It's something we've done for a long time now, so we'll purchase about 80% of what's required at the beginning of the season.
So that sounds a lot like what I was about to ask you in terms of managing price volatility as well. How do you touched earlier in one of our conversations that came up, and I mentioned it, there's been the use of milk futures here as one tool, but you've also talked about buying in advance. How do you use those things to manage price volatility when we've always got uncertainty coming in terms of even what is the milk price for this season? We're nearly finished. How do you manage that volatility?
Yeah, well, you just sort of got to read into what's happening around and sort of trust your gut and not overcommit either. This has probably been the toughest year to try and think about what we're going to do for the following season, where we actually haven't locked anything in yet for anything. We don't know if we're going to gain coming in early with all the prices coming up at the moment, or is it going to drop down coming to June and July. But previous years we've sort of had more of an inkling on what to do based off milk price for calf powder, etc. So we're probably in the same boat as everyone else at the moment, but previously, yeah, if we're on a winner, we'll pick it up and just stockpile it.
But that also sounds like being agile, being able to respond when you see an opportunity, having your finger on the pulse, and not responding, because sometimes that's the right thing as well. Being clear but not choosing to act gives you the opportunity to act again next week, next month as required. Yeah,
well, we've got a lot of trust from our owners in that too. So we've got to make sure that if we are purchasing ahead, we are winning, and if we're not, it's just a waste of cash flow. So.
And on that one, you talked when we were talking last week about the trust and flexibility that you have earned over your time here at Driffield. Could you just expand a little bit more on that? Because I think that's a part of the overall success here as well.
Tony, do you have a better quote on how to say it? But I guess, yeah, trust is earned, not given, and it's based off performance and what's happened in the past. So, yeah, it's something we've earned over the last 6 years, and, you know, everything's based off performance as well.
Which also flows nicely in terms of one of the other things we talked about, how does this achieve good cost control in terms of price. New Zealand is well served around co-ops that support our farming sector, and pleased that some of those are here today and supporting the Pasture Summit as well. How do you use the co-ops, buying groups, those kind of things to help your price purchasing decisions?
Yeah, I think they're really good. We don't use one in particular all the time. We'll shop around, and I think on scale and that you've got to be shopping hard, and, you know, everyone gets a first quote, but, you know, once it's relationship driven, you know, it's one quote and done pretty much. So you want them to be sharp, and once we've gone to a cooperative or the buyers group and that, we get a decent price or good price, we can step back, make that decision, you know, tick that box on the budget, and then move to the next item.
Fantastic. I love the idea that relationships are really important, but price and giving people the opportunity to come back in and make sure that they're serving you well is really, really valuable. Can you make sure that I don't dominate all the questions? Where's Slido? Have we got anything coming through there that we should take note of, Dan?
Yeah, we do. Actually, while I'm here, I'm just going to say I can't answer every question, I'm sorry. I've got quite a few coming through, and I'll sort of just pick them out as we're going through. But yeah, there is a couple of questions here. What are you doing to derive the higher stock income? What's your secrets?
That's the topic anyway, isn't it? What we're going to touch on. When it comes to culling cows, we just, rather than use them as a whole package, we'll split them into 3 or 4 categories. With young saleable cows, what are sold for carryovers, they generally make the most money per kilo. Then we'll have just general culls, they'll just go cull empties, 1 year budgets, and then also we'll sell cows as in-calf culls. So we try and get a premium out of every section of a product, which is generally just treated as one complete discard product, but there are a lot of little premiums you can get if you split the packages, and it does take a little bit more work drafting them out, inspection and that, but I think it definitely reflects on the bottom line.
There's a question here. It says, what is the cost structure for this season looking like?
I think we're running about 26 cents roughly above last year, but a lot of that's based off feed costs from spring.
There are 2 breakdowns for imported supplement. How much is fed for milking period versus the dry period?
Brought in feed for cows about 950 kilos of PK DDG, or roughly. PK is probably about 85%. We use DDG just in the early spring.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks, Chris. Thank you too to those of you asking questions. Really valuable that we hear your questions as well as those that Chris and I have talked about. There are 2 more that I do want to ask of you, Chris, and one is around the staffing costs, because whilst they appear higher, there's actually some more things that go into staff costing because of how you run the business. Your staff are doing things that in some businesses we choose to get contractors for, and so they don't fit in a staff cost, they fit in a different line item. They're still there. Just make sure that we're aware of all the things that you do, that where you employ staff to do those things that on other farms might look like another line item, please.
We do all our own fertiliser, so and that just goes into part of us growing grass, is the fact that the day the cows are out, there's fertiliser on the paddock. All of our own mowing, a lot of R&M as well. We do a lot of it ourselves. But because we winter on farm too, there's not a big downtime for anybody either. Everyone doesn't go on a holiday and they're off at grazing, but we're still fully staffed over the winter.
Thank you. So it's important as you look at some of those cost items to understand what's in behind it. Often we find that they might sit in a different line item in a different business, but those costs are still incurred one way or another. The other piece that I'm keen to hear you talk a bit more about is animal health, because that looks like a higher cost than the dairy-based average, but there's some proactive things that you're doing. Tell us a bit more about your animal health management and the expenses that are incurred because of that, but also how it impacts on performance, please.
Yeah, so we foot trim regularly. We're weekly just about the whole year. Even when they're in the winter barn, we still get some toe abscesses, but there's 2 sheds on these properties. I think originally, if there was 3, we're down to smaller platforms, less walking, but Driffield 2, furthest walk is 2.6 k's one way to the furthest paddock, so we need a few tyre changes, so we trim all the time proactively. With the rocket fuel, short grass, we've always got mag in the system and bloat oil. And we also, lame cows and that, every lame cow we treat with an anti-inflammatory. I think you flick them out, you give them some pain relief, and they're coming back into the herd faster. They're not out for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, they're back into the herd and back to mainstream. We do run a once a day herd all year round, but there's no limit on the number, but it always sort of hangs around 40 to 60, but just find with a bit of TLC and sort of proactive treatment, they're back in the system.
It sounds like attention to detail coming through again. Dan, let's come back. Any other questions there on Slido that you want us to use the last few minutes for, please?
Can you give us some examples of behaviours that build trust?
Not blowing the budget, I guess, is the first one, but I just having control. I think just because it's there, it doesn't need to be used. If you look at our capital budgets we've put in, apart from the winter barns and that, we actually don't need to replace stuff every year just because it's new and shiny, etc. Just running simple systems and just trying to stay in our lane and making sure we don't overspend, or we follow what we've shown we're going to do.
How do you budget for imported feed with such volatile seasons like the one coming ahead?
Yeah, we've whacked $120 per tonne on it. I'm not sure if that's going to be enough, but I think if you have a look back 2 years ago, not counting this year, feed costs were relatively high. I think PK was mid to high 400s, so we've done it before. You've just got to be smart about what you do and choose whether you're stepping over into that marginal milk line or not.
Any other questions from the floor? Well, let's wrap it there. Thank you very much, Chris. Another round of applause for Chris. I'm sure Alana and Tony, because this is very much a team effort, and those results are not achieved just by being out here today. They're achieved every day with attention to detail, which is really what I picked up as I went through and had the opportunity of digging into some of the income and expenses and profitability of this business. And my observation looking at that, I want to share with you, because I think it's really important. You know it, but it's just reinforcing again. Good cost control and high pasture performance can lower cost per kilo milk solids and create high profitability per hectare, and we see that here. We have to keep an eye on both metrics and ensure good discipline in pasture management, which we're about to get into, and also good discipline in financial management, which we've touched on, albeit lightly, but we've touched on some of the things there. I think it's important to acknowledge also that scale helps in this business, but overriding this and applicable to every business, small or larger, is planning and attention to detail in all aspects of the business. Those are things that we can all control, we can all contribute to, and we can therefore all achieve high performance if we set our minds to it. So thanks very much, Chris, for allowing us to dig into some of those things. Thanks, Veronica.
Thanks, Ron. Big round of applause.